I'm Roderick Wyllie.
I'm James Lord, and we're principals of Surfacedesign. It's based in San Francisco. And
Landscape architecture practice. We've been around for...
Well, since 2006. So
2006.
14 years, it looks like.
And so I think this is a kind of a conversation that we're doing in this podcast, and it might be a little bit different in the sense that it's a conversation between the two of us and maybe a little bit less of an interview per se. And so hopefully that will be interesting, and that, in fact, maybe you will see how our ideas overlap, and then maybe also see how our ideas might be different as well. I think that, in our practice, it's been important that there is conversation and that we don't all necessarily agree all the time, but that even that tension or sort of the sort of, I guess I want to say disagreement, but that's kind of not quite the right word, but that there's some like diversity of opinion actually brings a kind of richness to the work that we do.
And I think that's indicative amongst ourselves, but also the team that we surround ourselves. Because as nothing is done by an individual. In fact, in some ways, our firm has rebelled against the signature landscape architect, and in a way, Surfacedesign itself, not containing any of our names, was sort of a deliberate, important move for us to do that, because we see ourselves as a collective of various voices, and in some ways, when you look at our firm and the people that work for us, it is really an amazing group of misfits that come together from all over the world to create a shared voice in a way that allows different points of view and perspectives to coexist and push design and creativity to another level that I don't think you normally get.
And I think, so we should also even maybe outline what it is we do. So we've been, busy for the last more than a decade. Our focus has been landscape architecture. And I would say urban design, but the scale of the work is pretty diverse as well. We do small gardens, we do big master planning projects.
We do Auckland International Airport or the Smithsonian Institute with a master plan for that. And
so, actually all of that is pretty intentional. I think we came from, James and I are both educated. We met in graduate school at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, and in a way that education has a pretty clear ideology that kind of runs through it. I think it's even, and it's an ideology or an approach that I think we have a lot of reverence for. It's a modernist. It shares a really important modernist history in the United States, and to a certain extent with European modernism. Obviously Gropius is a huge figure there, but I think that
also Olmsted, because I think that's the interesting layer to this is, if you really look at Olmsted and where he came from and his problem solving and that blurring between engineering and larger systems and having that sensitivity and awareness, which through landscape has been sort of lost a little bit and resurfaces now and then. And I think that's inspiration for us.
But what I was going to say, I'm kind of jumping. So there's a little bit of background there. But what I was going to sort of bring up is that in some ways, I think we, the sort of the range of the work that we do is a little bit of a reflection of our interest to do more than maybe what we saw in a kind of an institution like the Graduate School of Design. I think we were, on a really simple level, we were really up for actually just kind of having an adventure with the work that we do. And so we I think maybe I did. I don't know what your take is, because you have a degree in architecture, so maybe it's a little different. I don't know, but my take is like we want to take a step back from the dogma, like that kind of dogmatic sort of residue of modernism in a place like the GSD, and open ourselves up a little bit to more, to like a more eclectic opportunity for how we could participate.
And I think that comes to both of us actually being Californians.
Yeah.
The fact that California and the attitudes and the views of basically, it's the Wild West. It's as far as you can go before you jump off to Australia and New Zealand, which we did as well. And I think that sort of freshness or or ability to think beyond what is the appropriate thing to do was really important in our work, because it pushes creativity and curiosity, which I think is lacking in the world right now. And Roderick's heard me 1,000 times saying this, but part of my view of the world is to how to rethink the world, and really the kinds of environments, stemming from coming from Los Angeles and literally being in Los Angeles when the riots of '92 happened, was really monumental in a way of challenging our built environment. And we have suffered from the traffic engineers and the box checkers and the bureaucrats and the people that don't appreciate things in a way that are emotive or that people can relate to, or people can curiosity, and we've suffered from it. If you think about how streets are made and the amount of just sheer area devoted to the car and even to the bike, you look at where the pedestrians are and you got a 5-foot sidewalk and you're slammed up against a building. And I think it contributed quite a bit in rethinking what that could be, and especially in Los Angeles at that time, because I do believe there's literally not enough open space, which is sort of ironic in LA, thinking about it as big as it is. But you only had Griffith Park, which is a vertical park, and then the beach, which is again on the far end of a major metropolis. So there was not a whole lot of access to open space. So part of that framing of materiality and how to do things and to challenge the engineers or the way of doing things is really sort of embodied in some of our work.
But isn't that sort of the excitement of Los Angeles, is that it isn't sort of this European approach to city making?
Absolutely.
And that there are different opportunities for
but
how
I'm
people...
not talking about doing a European city. I don't think that is it. I think there needs to be a balance between green or access to nature than to, let's just say, the death by asphalt experience that you get in LA. The beautiful part about LA, which I love so much being Los Angelino, is that it isn't until you're there and understand that each neighborhood had its own little world and culture, and that's what's so wonderful about LA. But you have to negotiate these crazy freeways and road networks to get to them, and I think that hell is almost like an impediment to these various neighborhoods interacting, or cultures, or placemaking. So I think it's very steeped in amazing as it is. It's just there's these things you need to jump over, and I think since '92, the city has tried to address the quality of the streets and those environments. But after what we're going through right now with this pandemic, I think everything needs to be blown up and really thought about in a different way on how you can actually layer in landscape into these cities to create a relief valve or a different engagement, because I think nature and being in nature really is an important thing, that once you're connected to it, there's a whole stress level and engagement, and your brain actually grows when you're in those kind of connected worlds. So whether it's Los Angeles or anywhere else, I think that is really important, and understanding planting and all that is part of that zone.
Yeah, we watched this documentary last week on Joan Didion, which was super interesting. Her kind of connection to California is represented in its, in a kind of an amazing way. She's from Sacramento. And then actually we saw my father, who just turned 88, and he actually, I guess, went to UC Berkeley with her, and which I didn't realize, which then prompted him to read actually Slouching Towards Bethlehem. But it's in some ways one thing I thought was pretty interesting is that she kind of, in some ways, as a writer, returns to New York. I mean, she's from California, and she kind of leaves California for New York initially, and then she returns to California to do probably in some ways her most important work, the work that really describes place and describes like culture as it's sort of struggling through ideas about freedom and about families changing and so on. And then in some ways, the way I viewed it, which sounds, this isn't really definitive, but I felt like New York was like a little bit of a retreat into the classic sort of like writer intelligentsia
absolutely.
And she remains still an amazing writer, but it's her connection to place like really substantially shifted. But also it's really great.
But that's almost a West Coast approach to looking at. We see things with bigger landscapes.
It is, and that early footage of her in California is so kind of inspiring. This like kind of this amazing writer, this person that's so compulsively attached to words. And at the same time, there are these photographs of her either driving or standing next to her like banana yellow Corvette. It's like this, and in some ways, like I kind of recognize that. I kind of recognize the sort of rigor that I hope or we aspire to bring to the work.
In the work, yeah.
And yet at the same time, I kind of don't feel afraid of maybe the banana yellow Corvette or something. And I think that is something that
it's not irreverence, but it's a fun. It's trying to get that sort of element of levity. Yeah. That I think we all need.
And a little bit of levity and a little bit of like badassness. Yeah, kind of, because why not? Why not? Like, I don't know, you're driving a car. Yeah. And there's like a celebration, I guess. Yeah. Maybe it's not it's not that. So I don't know. So to me, I think that has, I just found it to be kind of remarkable document of a time, but also of a character that I feel a bit connected to.
Yeah, I agree. And that it's that outlook on life and that commitment to what you do, and then to see emerge that is super important. And I think even in some of the work that we do internationally, it really becomes, you always get this question, like, well, aren't there landscape architects in these countries? Like, why would they hire you? And, and sometimes it is that sort of quality that we hope we bring to things with open eyes, that we literally see and read a site, not only just the soil and the plant materials, but the culture and where it sits within the world. Because a lot of times when you go to these environments, it's really hard if you live there because you're just used to it. You don't fully appreciate where you live or what the environment you're within is so special. And so sometimes coming with outside eyes, you're able to see that and then convey that to them through almost a storytelling kind of narrative approach to placemaking, and I think that's what a lot of times we do when we're working with these groups. And I think, like, typical or an interesting stories only comes from listening. And listening is, I think, one of the most important things that a landscape architect needs to do. And if you're working in communities, it's much, like the Maori in New Zealand, or even the descendants in Hawaii. You're working with communities that want to have a voice and be part of things, but they don't want to be labeled. They don't want a sign that says this is historic and this is how we did it and all that kind of crap. They're not interested in that. And we're not interested in that either. What we're interested in is being able to tell their stories through things that are happening now and how you approach things now. And I think even from the simplest thing, like at Anaha Tower, which, again, for various structural reasons, the whole building needed to be lifted 5 feet out of the ground. And all of a sudden you have ADA issues, of getting up to the front door. Well, rather than doing the usual, we wanted to combine the stories. How could we engage basically a need to go from A to B, but have an experience with it, and an experience that sort of talk about the layers that had happened on the site. And so this was where the fish ponds, which is how the descendants, it was literally their refrigerator, would collect fish and do this. So the abstraction of the experience and the forms going up to make that grade difference really came from those stories. And the notion of where you come from and was very important. So when they visit the site, they see it, that experience of going up that ramp in a totally different eyes than let's just say the person that maybe even living in the building. And I think that's important because storytelling is a means of getting a connection through design, in understanding a place and a narrative that people can understand. And I think that's really the big thing. But that narrative doesn't necessarily have to be the only narrative. And I think our work, when you see it, is interpreted in 1,000 different ways, and that's what makes it so rich.
I think, I don't know if I totally agree with what you said. Or maybe I agree, but I'm looking at it from a different lens, which is I sometimes think we're creating a framework. And, and I have a degree in music as an undergraduate. And so in some ways, I'm somewhat compulsively always adding that sort of layer of interpretation into what we do. And so I almost think of it more as like we've created a framework, but there's the opportunity for improvisation within
the same thing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So maybe it's just a different kind of it might be the same thing, but a different lens. And so in a way, it kind of brings me, I know we were hoping to maybe touch on a little bit about gardens, because we design gardens and we're really passionate about gardens. And I always think that, a lot of times we've created this framework and a real garden, though, that people really live in, which is different than, like, let's say a public plaza, but a personal garden is something that evolves. Like the gardener or the people that live with it, they kind of coax it into it's this evolving place.
Yeah, because it's a living thing.
Yeah, because it's a living thing. And I think that we did, as maybe in our earlier on, I don't think we embraced or celebrated that as much as we do now. And I think that has to do a little bit with, it's like we're very curious people. And so, when you're interested in public spaces, maybe really for like cultural reasons, like I want to contribute to the development of spaces that anyone can be in and heighten that experience of not only welcoming into anyone being there, but also provoke something else, curiosity or empowerment of some kind. I mean, I don't know how to do that except for to try to be thoughtful about how it might be used or flexible.
It's even the way that we approach universal access for all our projects.
Yeah.
It's not about impediment or you should use this way. It's about how do you get that freedom to engage with the entire landscape at the same time.
But then, you know, with a garden, it's actually kind of a different thing, I think. And it's something that I'm just beginning to, increasingly explore the idea that to really help clients understand that this is going to look and be different in 5 years. And it also might look and be different in 4 months.
Or 10 years or 20 years.
Or 10 years or 20 years.
You're patient enough.
But isn't that totally amazing is what I think.
Absolutely.
And I do think that within the field of landscape architecture, since this is a landscape architecture, podcast, sometimes I think designers, sometimes our, let's say, mentors have been less excited to look to the garden as the beginning place of inspiration because I think it didn't completely match up to often the collaboration that they were doing with architects.
Yeah.
But I think that time has changed. At least I see it as there are opportunities now to really celebrate the contribution, the contrast, the ecological opportunities with the garden and how the experience that people have. I mean, I think obviously we're pretty chatty and we'll be rambling on for a little while, but in this particular podcast, but I don't know that we didn't set out a list of 10 things to achieve when we started our office. And that was the funny thing about the book that we put together with Monticelli Press was just that we had other eyes to help us maybe try to understand what we've been up to.
Yeah.
And in a way I feel old enough to try to be honest about it. Meaning I'm not really sure what we did exactly, but something happened.
But that was part of the interesting thing was there was not only just the press, but actually the interviewers that had this conversation with Anita Bears-Betta, who is, the chairman at the GSD right then, or at least at the time. And, she was trying to position us or to figure out where we sort of sat in the pantheon.
Well, she kept asking us where we were historically, which I think we really just couldn't answer that question in a very satisfying way.
Yeah, because
I don't know.
We are a little weird and we don't fit in those kinds of molds. And that's why it was very interesting to see the foreword that was done by Alan Maskin of OKA, because we'd worked with him and he saw it was funny. He read the context of the book, but then realized there's this whole part of Roderick and James that no one really knows, that you're not, this sort of engagement that you have, how we challenge everything and everyone and in a good way and propel things in directions that whoever's on the team might not necessarily thought you would even go. And so that was the interesting part about the book, was to have this sort of other insight into yourself through other people's eyes and understanding where you could, or if it's even warranted that you were in this pantheon.
Did it make you feel like since the book is done, well, one thing that was really important to us was to not make it seem like this is it. This is the end.
This is not it.
And so we intentionally, we worked with these graphic designers who are really amazing, Binocular out of New York. But we told them we really didn't want it to make it feel like we died and this was like the collected work, but almost a little more informal. So really intentionally, we did not have it hardback. And also like one of the books that we looked at a bunch as a kind of precedent was a cookbook out of Australia,
out of Melbourne.
Yeah, called Is it super
New normal,
normal?
super normal, or whatever it was.
Which is
It was
a Chinese food, but
Which
we
was
just
awesome.
loved the way it was laid out, and the information was really clear,
Right.
and it was, photographs were really primary to the way that you would engage with the work. So, do you think, did we miss anything, or did it make you want to do something else?
I don't think so. I think I think it just, when you go through this process, and I mean, it is this sort of snapshot of where you are at the time. And I think I'm more intrigued with where things go. I mean, we've already started to build things that are not in that book and that are coming out incredible, and people are engaging it on giant level, like the Seattle waterfront, that, I wish was there, but I'm glad it's not, because I think in some ways, knowing sort of what we learned by revisiting where we've been did have a lot of influential sway on how we created that design, for that project, in a way that engaged sort of like the Barry Dillers of the world, but also the people that are just simply biking along the bike trail in Seattle in a way, and salmon safe. It was a large enough scale project that really had to deal with all these things that you do as a landscape architect, and it became I think some of the influences from the various projects been worked on in the past, from the Museum of Steel to reusing materials and all this kinds of stuff, really did sort of play itself out there. And I'm interested. It's not done yet, but I think that was fascinating to me.
I'm the one that actually buys books. I love books, and and so I was really engaged a lot along with McCall Kapeltonic in our office, engaged a lot with the sort of development of it, along with, I should say, Marion Brenner, who we worked with, who's a photographer who's actually really influenced a lot of us.
Yeah. I mean,
because, to us, the final part of the project is the documentation of it.
It doesn't stop with the design, and it doesn't stop with the construction.
But it
continues on through the photography.
But I feel critical of books, even though I'm the one that that is really excited about them, and books, and I'll put magazines in there. Although I probably am really super excited about like the book as a form, but the sort of upside of it to me is that now someone can see the work without having to travel all over or gain access to these places. Yeah. But the criticism I have is that, in fact, you kind of know that none of it's entirely true. And that's why, I mean, we've spent a lot of time when we could traveling to places. Yeah. Because what is real? And I think even in particular, sometimes architecture even has I'll say a more potentially deceptive kind of like representation of a final project. And so to me, I mean, kind of when we first met, because like one of the first trips we took was to Barcelona, and going to see the Barcelona Pavilion, and just thinking like, is this real or not? Because, I would say 50% of the time it's not. I don't know. My experience of that building was that I was really blown away. So that was really great. But of course, I think that's even more so the case in gardens and landscapes, because, they disappear sometimes, or they get, if you finally go to Bloedel in, Bainbridge off in Washington, outside of Seattle, my experience, having been there a few times, is like, I always forget how actually huge it is, and how like there's this amazing choreography, and it's so dramatically seasonal.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
And so this book is just it is what it is. It's kind of as glamorous as we could represent these photographs, or I don't know about glamorous, but as seductive and as kind of immersive as we could, which is, I mean, I'm not really ashamed of that. But I think about it,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's why these ephemeral qualities of the photography, like the light, become so important.
Yeah, right.
And that light, or even understanding how light works within the landscape is really important. And that's something I don't think a lot of people investigate when you're designing things. I mean, like the water feature at IBM that we did was all about that. Yeah. It was really all about registering, because Hawaii changes things on a dime, and so it was really important to create a medium like water or a water table that could register that reflection and movement, that dynamic. The landscapes are dynamic, and that's some way the book is sort of that a snapshot of that, but it's not,
it's pretty static on some level, right? It's a book.
So I mean, I think that's why,
although books also have like fragrance and they're tactile and all that.
Well, that too. I mean, at least so are landscapes.
Well, no, I mean, I think much more so. They're spatial.
And those kinds of the fragrance and emotional connections to these things become really important, and I think that's what we try to figure out. A little bit.
I mean, so much of it is also, when we say we're trying to tell a story, I think we're also saying that we're kind of, we can design a garden for ourselves. That's fine. I mean, actually,
we're
speaking in a garden that is for us. But ultimately, like, much of what we do, we need to tell someone's story, and I don't know what that story is all the time, but otherwise we don't really have a starting point, because it is collaborative, right? I mean, it's about we had a client for a small residential project who told us that we should create a horticultural bordello or whatever, and of course, like, they were trying to be provocative, but we wouldn't have done what we did without, hearing that from them, because, I don't know, for all we knew, we didn't know that. And that's not, so that's what I think also is reflected in the book which is just this snapshot of the work, but is this, a lot of voices, I hope, in there, a lot of, and not just the client or the brief, but I think of the Woodside project in the book, the Oliveto, and I kind of see like Andreas's voice in there too, who works in our office and has a really amazing sensibility with planting, and
just giving opportunities to characters like him who clearly have done tomes on Mediterranean landscapes in Spain. He's Spanish, so he's from Spain, and so like here you are in California, and then what is the tome, or what is the quintessential California landscape merged with what else you could mix in? So it's, in some ways, I think that voice comes through that meadow very clearly, because it's not your typical English meadow, and it's not your kind of thing. It's actually something different, more about the place and about the characters that are creating it.
But there are, a batch of contemporary designers in California that I think we see a bit of overlap with, and maybe that's a little presumptuous on our part, but I do think that there's a kind of an amazing community in Northern California, especially, which is where we're based, that we can clearly kind of reference the, inspiration from, and I mean, we both worked for Peter Walker, so there is somehow underneath some of this stuff a little bit of
and
that
George
kind
Hargraves was my mentor
in terms of
age,
grading. But then people that we know and are friends with, like Andy Cochran or
Bernard Trainer
or Ron Lutzko, are people that actually are maybe slightly more, maybe set a little bit of groundwork for some of our planting inspiration, I would say.
Yeah.
These are people that really embrace the idea of native plants but in a highly designed kind of context. And I think that's amazing and really inspiring. Yeah. So it's not like we're kind of operating out of a void,
No.
Yeah.